Hi, everyone. I'm Linda Reese, Managing Partner of Leader Onboarding. Thanks for joining us today as we talk about building belonging for new hires. Hearing your experiences and ideas is important to us, and we'll be asking for your input through polls and also host a Q&A session at the end. By the end of our conversation today, we hope that you'll agree that feeling a sense of belonging is important to new hires and affects both performance and longevity, that there are specific elements that create a sense of belonging for these new hires, and that it's valuable to incorporate a focus on building belonging into your own onboarding processes. Here's why building belonging for new hires is so important right now. There was research published in the Harvard Business Review 3 months before COVID hit that demonstrated that at that time, 40% of employees already said that they felt isolated at work. And the study found that those feelings result in lower organizational commitment and engagement. If we consider the human impact of COVID on top of that pre-existing situation, this statistic is cause for alarm, especially concerning new hires. And conversely, if employees feel like they belong, companies reap substantial bottom line benefits. High belonging was linked to a whopping 56% increase in job performance, a 50% drop in turnover risk, and a 75% reduction in sick days. If you were part of a 10,000 person company, improving employee sense of belonging would result in annual savings of more than $52 million. Joining us in our conversation today is my valued colleague, Stephanie Henderson. She is Leader Onboarding's Assessment Practice Leader. We've been fascinated by job transitions for over 20 years and believe there's always something new to learn, and we are looking forward to learning from you. One thing we do know from our experience during the global pandemic is that across many industries, it has become much more challenging to build belonging for new hires. The early days of any job can be chaotic. We don't know who's who or what's what. Building belonging helps bring order to that chaos. Confusion and complexity can be simplified and made manageable through robust, intentional onboarding. And when we fail to intentionally support transition, we are signaling the lack of value we place on the employee, that we don't care very much about their own sense of belonging. Reducing that confusion is foundational to building belonging, giving new hires a sense of home. We want them to feel the company provides a community that supports them, that's invested in their success, that makes time for them, and that signals their value. There are many details in each transition that need to be attended to and are expected to be handled well. Everything from getting a computer and online access to enrolling new hires in benefits and payroll. If it's expected that these welcoming actions happen seamlessly, we're likely to get little credit for getting them right, instead only facing risk for getting them wrong. In fact, here at Leader Onboarding, we call these items dissatisfiers. And missing those details can undermine a new hire's sense of belonging. A recent article about Amazon highlighted an interesting practice. They devote the week before the start date to something they call pre-boarding, and that's where they tackle all these essential items. Orientation is almost universal, and it is important and helpful, but it's also brief, and it's only a start, unless you happen to build an onboarding cohort that continues to be connected afterwards. If there's little impact that onboarding has on the new hire's sense of belonging. And it's really what happens after orientation that matters the most. In our research, we have found that the keys to success are knowledge acquisition, the ability to form collaborative relationships, and access to feedback. And together, these three make or break transitions. We've done applied research with our clients for over 20 years and have discovered that this still holds true. For new hires to succeed and stay, they must do well at what we call the big three. Acquire the knowledge needed for successful job performance, and that's everything from understanding performance expectations or historical context to the current business conditions and any plans for the future. to build relationships that contribute to collaboration and teamwork, and that would be up, down, and across the organization, and to acquire and act upon feedback about themselves related to how they handle their transition, the extent to which they're seen as getting the culture, and much more, and receive that feedback early enough that they can course correct. Think for a moment about the last job you started. Who were the people who provided crucially important information to you? Sometimes there's an organizational historian. They're eager to share what they know. And other times colleagues have access to a treasure trove of documents related to strategy and priorities. And if you're lucky, you'll stumble across someone who's wise about navigating the political climate. But how do we know where to go or who to talk to? It should not be left up to new hires to have to ferret out information related to their transition, especially those who are working in virtual and hybrid work environments. A strong onboarding process that goes beyond orientation builds in supports for comprehensive learning and expects stakeholders to the new hire to actively engage in that process. Let's take a minute to talk about best practices in your own organizations. We have a poll we'd like you to complete, and we'd like to know which of the following onboarding best practices do you offer to support knowledge acquisition specifically? Do you share a glossary of terms and acronyms with new people? Do you provide comprehensive company history? Do you deliver an overview of how the industry works that possibly could include some intelligence about competitors? Do you have a buddy program for information sharing? Do you support an onboarding application or portal that brings together important information? Do you provide a document that identifies where important information may be located electronically? Or do you have some other practices that you'd like to share? If you do, we'd like you to click on the Q&A widget at the bottom of your screen and enter your best practices there. And I'm going to turn it over to colleague Stephanie, who's going to share the findings of the poll with us.
We've got a lot of activity, so I'm going to give it just another few seconds here to see what people are doing before we end the polling. And here we go. So really, sharing the glossary of terms and acronyms with new people is a very standard practice across this population that we have on our live event today. Close second is support an onboarding application or portal that brings together important information. So there's some knowledge access there. And then a buddy program and a comprehensive company history are the last ones. So there's a lot going on to help. And I don't see anything in the Q&A for this time. So we've got a lot of people really getting at the basics and what's really necessary for people to be able to function. So what's next, Linda?
Well, thanks for the overview, Stephanie. When we're talking about knowledge, relationships, and feedback, the absolutely essential determinant of onboarding success is the capacity to build and maintain strong relationships. New hires will acquire useful knowledge and corrective feedback from those they feel connected to. And doing all three successfully is highly predictive of their longevity and role and their performance overall. Building belonging depends on our ability to create circumstances where relationships and knowledge acquisition may be structured, but they also feel natural and appropriate. For example, we'll talk about this later in the presentation, but at Google, they've reduced general onboarding to 5 simple steps that build belonging. Let's now talk about best practices around supporting relationship development in your organization. And let's take a few minutes to share your onboarding approaches in this poll. And again, you should check all that apply, but which of the following onboarding best practices do you offer to support relationship development? Do you have an onboarding cohort that continues to meet periodically to build relationships? Do you have new hires identify key stakeholders and encourage them to meet with them regularly? Does your hiring manager make introductions and pave the way for relationship building? Do you hold regular events to recognize new employees and expose them to a broad range of colleagues? Do you make a point of including new hires in meetings that are relevant to them and providing a list of other regularly occurring meetings? Or do you have other best practices that you could share with us in the Q&A widget? Stephanie, I'm going to hand it off to you, but I'd also like to note that she's going to talk with us next about feedback, and she is our resident expert about feedback, so you should look forward to hearing from her.
Thank you, Linda. So as we look at the poll, the hiring manager making introductions is by far the highest one. So we're doing a good job of asking our hiring managers to help our new employees create new relationships. We also are including our new folks in meetings, as well as, well, those are our two highest ones. What comes next is identifying key stakeholders and encouraging folks to meet regularly. So we're doing a lot to facilitate that that sense of where are we going and how do we create relationships. So that is very promising and making people feel like they belong. So, gosh, so we've talked about how people gain knowledge and how they form relationships, and how the organizations help with that. Now there's this idea of new hires need to navigate their new role, and feedback is our navigation tool. Often our coworkers are understandably reluctant to provide it, and it shouldn't be left to chance. Feedback comes in many forms. Body language makes up over 60% of communication. Right now, many are joining companies and are experiencing them virtually. The limit of that two-dimensional virtual meetings makes it even harder to see nonverbal communication and feedback. I'm sure a lot of you on this event right now have experienced that a lot for yourselves. So when you're new, how do folks read the room if they don't even know the people that are in the room? How do they understand what's expected from them? How do they understand where they need to learn more and where they need to course correct? Making feedback available is a crucial building block for long-term success. So, because it's important, we'd like to hear about what's already going on in your organization. So let's take another few minutes for another poll. Please check all that apply. Which are happening in your company? Do you ask new employees to share feedback about their own onboarding experience? How about holding regular check-ins with the hiring manager? Providing informal feedback to the new employee throughout their first few months? When you've got somebody who leads people, do you help them with facilitating team assimilation or team alignment? And what about multi-rater feedback to the new employee within their first 3 months? Do you have any that haven't been listed here and you'd like to share in the Q&A? Okay. So our top one is asking the new employees to share about their own experience. Second up is having that regular check-in with the hiring manager, HR partner. And then informal feedback. We've got very few with formal multi-rater feedback. So thanks for sharing. So now we're going to go into the solutions. We really touched on those during the polls. But as we think about knowledge, our new folks really need to both understand their new organization at a high level and have access to the relevant details when they need them. You know, what we learned from our polls is you do provide a glossary of terms and acronyms most regularly, as well as company history. There's even often a knowledge management portal where people can go to find out what they need. But not to be overlooked or pushed aside is making a guide available who can help the new hire find the information they need and even navigate the organizational maze. This can create a more integrated experience, which builds belonging. And then relationships also help with the knowledge, and it helps create a lot of stickiness. It requires meeting with people virtually when necessary and in person when possible. Our orientation cohorts are a good place to start. Having that hiring manager make sure that you know who to meet, and then making sure that folks are included in meetings helps as well. So we promised some information about Google, who did some research about building belonging. And their 5 simple steps that make the most difference are matching the new hire with a peer buddy, helping the new hire build a social network, setting up the employee onboarding check-ins once a month with the new hire's first 6 months, encouraging open dialogue, and then that hiring manager meeting those folks on their first day. In fact, the absence of that hiring manager meeting can be a significant source of dissatisfaction for the new hire, making them feel devalued. And then we want to move on to feedback. As many of you have said, we are starting to do a good job of asking new hires about what is important to them early on and how the organization helps them feel like they belong. That gives us great information for continuous improvement in our companies. We are less likely to provide feedback to new hires. In fact, only 5% in the poll said that that was happening in their companies. And they need to know how they are doing. Feedback can be challenging to give and receive. That's why tools help. A structured process that provides feedback from multiple sources early on, before impressions have a chance to become etched in stone, is key to giving and receiving feedback. For new employees and leaders, receiving feedback anonymously from multiple sources helps create a focus on what can be done to be more effective, rather than on what is going wrong. Greater anonymity ensures that feedback is honest and open. Every organization has a window of judgment, that period when opinions about new people can still shift. Providing feedback while their window is open is good for new employees and the company. Level Set Early Feedback is a tool specifically researched and designed to address just this. We at Leader Onboarding believe feedback should be available to every strategic new hire. To get that done, building the capacity inside an organization to provide feedback is a way to make that happen. We are providing regular qualification workshops so that your strategic hires can get the feedback they and their companies need. Qualified facilitators are equipped to provide expert feedback, expert delivery of the feedback, and information that is grounded in research, and help your strategic new hires target their action for greatest success. Registration for our June workshop is now open. We'd love for you to join us. The link to register is in the chat window. And you can find the link on our homepage at www.leaderonboarding.com. We will also send you the link in an email with your copy of Onboarding Best Practices for Building Belonging. In addition, attendees will receive a link to the recording of this event next week. Feel free to share it with others who might be interested. So that concludes the presentation, and what we'd really like now is to hear from you. What questions or comments do you have about this idea of building belonging, especially in this virtual environment we find ourselves? Go ahead and place those questions in the chat. So Linda, here's a question that we're getting. What do we find as best practices that truly build belonging in this virtual environment we find ourselves today?
Well, that's a great question, Stephanie, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to answer it. I think that we need to remember that when new people are joining a virtual team, they're often joining a group of people that knew each other and worked together face to face before the global pandemic hit. So they've got established relationships. And it's really important to be intentional about recognizing that these new folks who are joining are at a disadvantage. There's a great article, again, I'm a big fan of Harvard Business Review. There's a great article in there in 2019 about doing team building and building belonging for remote teams. It can be as simple as playing online games as a way to get people to know each other informally. I think we're going to be doing a breakout room in one of the sessions that I'm involved in next week. Doing fun icebreakers that cause people to sort of let down the force field and tell something about themselves that no one else in the call knows. Usually that also results in having enough people who have musical talent that they can put a band together. And generating structured conversations about specific topics. That could be having people read an article on a topic that's important to the team, and then having sort of a book club or something like that. And another thing that we found that helps build connection in virtual organizations is creating the opportunity for people to join interest groups. And those can be things that are completely not work related. It could be yoga, it could be rock climbing, it could be travel. And those are just a few of the ways to create a more informal culture.
Thanks, Linda. We've got actually a couple of questions here that are about inclusion. How do we think about belonging virtually when we have folks with physical and mental disabilities? How do you include folks that have challenges that we don't always think about? What a great question.
Well, and actually, we have a client that we're working with right now that is addressing this very issue. There's a gentleman who's visually impaired in the work group, and we just had a conversation about how we are providing information to the team he so that he gets his needs met. He uses a screen reader, but also monitoring ourselves to make sure that we are behaving in a friendly way by not using all caps. That's shouting for most of us, and not using too many images, but relying on words. But I think every organization needs to think about accessibility on multiple dimensions.
Thanks. And then there's the other virtual team challenge that we've had a lot of conversation about within our organization, and I've been hearing about it in a lot of places, which is how do you create inclusion for those who do not have a typical schedule or have distractions such as children, elder care. In my case today, I had nice concrete people working outside, cutting concrete right outside my window. So there's all sorts of distractions that happen.
Well, I think one of the things that's really important for us to think about is what are our cultural norms around formality? Because, working in a time of COVID has caused many of those to go out the window. And I think we really need to have empathy for and support people who engage in work in a different way. It could be that we meet people's pets because their cats are very insistent on coming into a meeting. It could be we meet their toddler. But it's also that we don't hold meetings during nap time if they are forced to be at home with their kids until their childcare opens back up. And, in general, people who work virtually have always experienced or been more likely to experience exclusion. And we need to remember that as social psychologists, well, I'm a social psychologist, that we are less likely to give benefit of the doubt to people that we don't feel connected to. So whatever we do to create norms of inclusion and support and non-judgment within a virtual work setting, we need to remember that that is what allows us to work together effectively. And we need to critically examine our own cultures to make sure that we are being inclusive in our policies.
Yes. So as this question makes me think about before the pandemic, there was that viral video of the reporter who was being interviewed, and his children decided to be interviewed as well. And everybody thought that was so unique. And it seems to be a daily occurrence. I know I've been on meetings with people, their kids walk in, they calmly say something and they walk back out, and it seems to work. So that idea of being tolerant, being accepting, and being non-judgmental is really important. We also have somebody asking about sharing the Google steps again. So I will repeat those, and you know what? We will include those in our best practices document and reference them as the Google. So they're match the new hire with a peer buddy, help the new hire build a social network, set up employee onboarding check-ins once a month for the new hires for 6 months, encourage open dialogue, and have those hiring managers meet their new hires on the first day. We've heard some stories where people really feel demoralized when, for instance, the hiring manager is out on vacation and the new employee starts. So it's really important.
Stephanie, I would also suggest that we drop a link into the article about Amazon's practices for onboarding virtual workforce, because that is largely how their folks are working, and they are onboarding from all areas of the country rather than relocating. And you know, what we discussed in the presentation was just the tip of the iceberg in terms of their best practices, but I found them pretty compelling, and I think there's some lessons to be learned from them.
Absolutely. So anyway, so this idea of feedback too, somebody's asking about, you know, what are best practices for feedback in this virtual environment? So we do need to help people set up the opportunity to form relationships so that they can get feedback. Some ideas, the idea of creating interest groups where people can come together and talk about those passions outside of work, such as hiking, gardening, going out and identifying trees, whatever it is. Some people climb mountains. So whatever it is that can bring people together even virtually is really important, because then they can get the feedback they need because they've established a relationship. Structuring conversations is also important. So helping our new employees know to maybe close conversations, to say, hey, did I ask everything I needed to ask? Is there something else that we didn't cover in this conversation that you want to have covered? Always a good practice, and provides valuable feedback to that new hire. Always asking, so you've had a chance to watch me in meetings and be part of things. What else can I be doing to be more effective? Or even ask, how is this done effectively at our organization? All positive ways to learn and know what you're doing is working, or where you need to tweak something.
Stephanie, I'd also like to add that I think we all need to do work within our own organizations about what the word feedback actually means, because I don't know, sometimes my palms sweat when someone says, can I give you some feedback? Because in their organization, feedback may only be corrective. So I think of what we can think of is that feedback is the objective and helpful sharing of information that allows someone to recognize both where they're doing well and where there's a gap between their intent and the impact they have, and learning to be conversant and sharing it freely so that it doesn't incite fear in the recipient, particularly the new person who is feeling a little vulnerable and out there as a highly visible hire.
Super. Well, we are at the bottom of the hour. I would like to say thank you to all of our participants, and we look forward to having more conversations with you in the future.
Thanks for joining us.